All right, folks. Tonight we've got episode 112. Uh, my guest tonight, I, I honestly thought that I would have him on later in this experiment. I don't know why. It was just something that I thought that he would be on later, and the timing of everything just worked out. So we've got him tonight. Um, a a a good dear friend doesn't even begin to describe it. Um, uh, Confidant, mentor, mentee, friend, brother, uh, battle partner in ways I don't have enough uh, words. Uh, Batman and Robin, Laurel and Hardy, Snoopy and Charlie. I'll let you decide who's who. But I've got my good friend Mike Neal with me tonight, and we're just going to talk for either 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 hours. This may be a 24-hour loop that you'll find us playing. I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons at hour 7. I have no clue. Um, who knows? Liam may come down at some point, or Kristen may come and tell him to go to bed at some point. But here we are. Let's hit it. Mike, Neal,
Wow. What an
so-
intro. I don't think my wife has ever introduced me quite so well.
Well, there you go. There you go. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen.
That's
Have
it.
a wonderful
Good night.
So we've actually just set this up where whenever Mike's feeling down, I just intro him on a 45-second podcast, and then that's it. See, that's
I'm hyped
friendship.
and amped. That is
That's
friendship. I am
friendship.
amped now.
I know what you're going to do. You're just going to clip this on YouTube, and whenever Kristen gets on you, you're going to be like, well, I have other friends. Gonna hit play.
And that is marriage, folks.
Yeah. So when I first started this, I put out a Google Doc, a Google form for folks to fill out all sorts of information. Some of it was practical to the podcast, like what type of equipment do you have? So on my end, I knew what I was working with. And other stuff was because I've been interviewing all sorts of people. And so some folks have projects they're working on. And you filled one out as a total smartass, which I had then deleted. And so some of the stuff of it's, hey, is there something you want to talk about? Is there something you want me to stay away from? Because of all my guests, I do want to be mindful. If someone's like, hey, this was in the news or this was something and I don't, fine. Someone said, hey, family's off limits. Fine, no big deal. We'll talk about whatever. Having said that, I have nothing for you right now. So you have no clue what you're walking into. Neither do I. So it's just going to be.
I think that's been the story of our relationship.
Yeah, I know, right?
No holds barred at any level.
So we also had this has the potential, and I think maybe this is why I thought I would put off having you on there for a while, because I thought this has the potential to go A, sideways, B, end up on CNN for like 3 news cycles, which anything less than 3 and I'd be disappointed. But 2, it also has a potential to devolve into just a decade plus of inside jokes that nobody will ever get except for 2 or 3 people, and they'll think, you guys shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so
to the grave stuff.
Yes. I noticed you had, before we get into anything, I noticed you had a water bottle over there. This mug, I didn't mean for this mug to be something, but I guess for 2 podcasts in a row, I've had this.
Yeah.
And so now this is the official podcast mug that at someday will be in the Smithsonian under podcast excellence.
Podcast excellence.
Yes.
That's amazing. Rush Limbaugh, Bob Starkey.
Rush Limbaugh.
Right there.
So
Right there.
for those of you listening or watching, I apologize. Listening is better, I suppose. You'll see that Mike here has an amazing setup. He and I have been working for, I really think we had this idea 6 months or a year ago to do a podcast, and it was kind of a slow burn for both of us. And so you are the host of Mike on the Right, and we've talked a few times about, oh, maybe I'll do yours, maybe you'll do mine. We'll just kind of see how it goes. But you are really focused on what is one of your passions. It's local, state, international politics, and how some of those kind of bleed into life and some of your religious philosophies and thoughts. Um, this is going to sound very interviewy. We've talked, but how is it going for you? Are you finding fulfillment or joy out of it?
Yeah, I tell you what, I was always the kid in class that was always written up for talking too much. I was very social, and so
I want to interrupt you. It's like, hey, for kids who talk too much in class, how's your podcast
yeah,
going now?
that's so right. That's so true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
And so I've always been someone who likes to communicate and likes to talk for better or for worse. And now in the career that I've been in, I've essentially been a professional talker and a professional leader in a lot of ways. And so you're right, about a year ago, I was like, man, I really want to start talking about things that I want to talk about. Like I've worked for other people, all wonderful people from Mike Pence and the Adjutant General of India, and just a number of people and things. And it's like, okay, in fact, as we're recording this is my 38th birthday today, and so I keep saying for 37 years,
I was
but
going to have a streamer, but
but but for 38 years, it's like I feel like now I've got like something I want to start saying, right? I mean, I'm a little young to be thinking about legacy and things like that, but it's like, what, I got things I want to say, and I don't know how long I'm going to get to say them. And my position is I'm a local, state, national, international political nerd. I'm looking at when Latvia has elections all the way down to Lagodi, Indiana. And so
they
for
have
me,
one good Dairy Queen
they
in
have an
Lagodi.
amazing dairy. Thought you were going to say Latvia, and I was like, goodness, you've been around, but
Yes, I have. Welcome
um,
to the podcast.
and so for me, it's I want to share my thoughts of that, and you mentioned that through a Christian worldview lens that I picked up when I was a young man through the church that I attended and grew up in, and actually what got me involved in politics and standing up for what I believe in, and no matter what that costs and what that looks like. And so my podcast talks about all of those political issues, but it also kind of throws in that leadership in life component. Sometimes I'll talk about something that's not in the news; it's just something that's on my heart, and really it's going well. One of the things I read in podcasting, and you and I have talked about, is that when you first start, it's going to be a high. You're going to get a spike. All these people who love you are going to give you support, and then they're going to find out what the show's about. And that doesn't mean they love you any less, but it's not something that they're going to commit to all the time.
Right.
And so then you kind of get this lull. And I finally have come to a point where I feel like I've seeded and plateaued. And now I'm on kind of this slight rise as you put things in social media and draw other people outside of your sphere of influence to listen. And a very great podcaster once told me it take you 2 years, a year or two, to really build the podcast that you want, and you've got to persevere even in those highs and when nobody listens for a day.
Right.
And so
And
that's
and
where I'm at.
I've found a lot of that where I think one of our first, this is really how the sausage is made in terms of how we came up with our different podcasts. They seemingly came out at the same time, but we've really talked about, what are we looking to get out of this?
Right.
And um I often said, look, while I'm in politics in so many different ways, I don't have the grasp or maybe the interest to grasp it. I'm perfectly fine listening, but to know enough to speak on it, I don't have that. Where you said to me, well, look, I will be happy to watch a podcast from you about Star Trek or Star Wars,
Right.
but I have no interest in speaking to that.
I mean, I even listened to your tattoo artist episode, and I never planned to ever get a tattoo. You know, and but that's the thing, right? That's what we support each other in.
Well,
And
and so some of it, I think you've got a pretty good theme going on. People know what to expect. For me, I mean, I've had, um, just butcher baker candlestick maker on mine. So at any given time, I can see where it's gonna take a long time for anybody to be interested in, say, it's really gonna have to be either episode specific, like, "Oh, I'm interested in I know Mike Neal, I'm interested in Indiana local state politics, so I'll listen to that." But the same person that will listen to, yours might not listen to, a previous episode I had with, Canadian actress, Sharon Taylor,
Right.
because, here we're talking about, um the acting industry and the film and television, that industry, and we're doing that has nothing to do with politics whatsoever.
Right.
The only connection is we all know each other through me somehow. And so I have found that um, mine looks like this. I don't know
Right.
that, but it's entirely episode specific. And if I see someone, if two episodes have 50 views, I can almost guarantee that 40 of each are completely different.
Sure. Yeah.
And but I also don't know what my goal is,
Right.
other than the idealized. We initially, had the conversation of, my mom said I should do something to document, the randomness of my life, and so it's that. So if nobody buys the book, I'll call it, it maybe it wasn't theirs to buy anyways. I
Right.
don't know.
Right. But no, you've talked about this all the time. And it's someone, I don't know how many of these folks that you've had on your show knew your mom, but I knew your mom as almost as long as I've known you because she was involved in what you were doing and helping make you successful. And I know you talked about that with Ben Evans, and we've talked about that in other places about how she was a part of your success and how this is essentially, hey, write a book about yourself. Well, I can't spell, or I'm not a good,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not,
Public education.
yeah, right, yeah.
Get in for teachers, please. CBS cares. Send your
Paid for by
send your
viewers like
literature.
you.
Yeah, paid
Yeah,
for.
that's right.
PBS. Ooh, oh, too soon on the
Too soon.
PBS thing.
Rip.
Rip.
But and I know that about you and about your mom and have been around her for a number of years and how much she cared for you and how much she would be incredibly proud about what you're doing because you know what, there's different niches of what people are going to listen to, but it's you essentially fulfilling what your mom asked you to do, just
Yeah.
in your way, which
Yeah,
I think she would understand.
in my way, and she would understand that because I, not unlike yourself, and we're going to talk about our career paths. Nothing about mine has been scripted at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have never thought that at 43 I'd be doing any of this whatsoever.
Yeah.
I don't know how it happened, and so, we're just kind of documenting that. Um, what I want to talk about is I want to take people on a journey of how we met, and we've talked about it a few times, but I want to hear from your perspective. I think it was a Baker Square. I think we had lunch at Baker Square.
Somewhere.
I think,
I thought it was
and
in Dyer. I don't know why I always think of it's not the white Rhino, but over
White
by where
Rhino.
the white
No, it
rhino's at.
wasn't there.
I
For
just thought it was in
some reason,
Dyer. I don't know.
for some
Could have
reason,
been.
I think it was Baker Square. I
Yeah.
could be having a blood sugar episode and just craving French silk pie at the moment. But but really,
But it was revolving around food, which is
yeah, it was. It
that's
was.
where it all
Which,
started.
as a side note, before I ask you, hey, tell me from your perspective how we met. I was going through, and unfortunately, I didn't have the time I wanted. I was going through pictures of you and I because I thought, oh, this would be funny. This would be funny. Now, some of them would be RGEs,
Yeah.
resume generating events.
Right.
And so we're not going to do those.
Right.
But the amount of pictures that you and I have with food is
Specifically Mexican food.
specifically Mexican. And I can't tell you how many times, for folks in the audience, as milk toast white as you can be, I think for the first 4 or 5 years that I knew Mike, I would even have to text him and say, "Hey, what's that Mexican dish I like, and how do I say it? How do I order that?" And now I'm
Oros
like,
con
"Oros
pollo."
con pollo." And that's the Opus clip right there. We're done. Yeah, yeah, and that's That's
Oh, that's
that's
amazing.
that's honestly, that's
Oh.
really fucking sad.
Yeah.
Is what it is. That's just right now, somebody's watching on YouTube, doom
Uh-huh.
scrolling at 3 in the morning, like, who are these fat white dudes who can say "Oros con pollo" in unison? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that I don't know how much more we can.
Yeah, you said
So
this thing could go 5 minutes. That might be right where it ends.
that's it. So, but
Uh,
let's go back. So that I know this was the end of 2021. No, 2011.
2011. Yeah.
And I had just lost my first race that I ran for. I ran for clerk treasurer in Dyer. Didn't know what I was doing, had no business running, and somehow it launched a the career of a lifetime, opportunities of a lifetime, from Dyer to DC, meeting
Yeah.
the best people that I've ever
Yep.
met, who I'm still friends with, who without them I wouldn't have my family today.
Yeah.
And so from your memory, from your data
Yeah.
banks in your head, it's the end of 2011. Why I don't even why did we meet?
So I was the chairman of the Lake County Young Republicans. I had just been elected that summer. Prior to that, I had gotten involved through an organization that myself and some friends started called the Young Conservatives Alliance, and we actually had coalesced around Dan Klein, the former mayor of Crown Point, who was running for state representative in District 19 against the incumbent Shelley Vandenberg at the time. And we had made some waves by getting just a ton of young people to come and knock more doors in a single state house district than had ever been knocked before, including that cycle. And so it turned heads. We got involved in politics at the state house. Got invited to tour and meet people. And then I was elected that summer in 2011 as the returning of the new chair of the Lake County Republicans. Had been dormant for a while, so came to do that. And in my quest to find people that were my age to get involved and to build an organization that would actually do something and last, is I think how we came across each other, because you were someone of my age group who had run for office and had done so valiantly, just in a headwind that we were never going to get past in Dyer with what was
Never.
going on with that Lake Central referendum, which you lost at the same
I
percentage.
lost. I lost. I supported it. It was a
Right. Yeah.
capital referendum.
Right.
You
Yeah.
you need a
Yep.
mortgage to buy a house. I'm
Right.
okay with a capital referendum.
Right.
But just because it was, hashtag red for Ed, for some reason
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, you're Republican, you must hate it." And I think I even had the yard sign for it in my yard,
Well, and
but
and
it didn't
the
matter.
stranglehold, especially back then at that time, it was just after the Tea Party had happened. But really, the unions, especially from Lake County, where unions still continue to be dominant in a lot of areas, though maybe some of that has weakened over time. But in 2011, they were incredibly strong, and so the same people who were going to get this work, or at least the brethren, if you're in the Teamsters and you know that the iron workers are going to get this job,
Yeah,
you support them anyway. They came out and they voted for the referendum and they pressed D, because that's who they are, that's who they were.
yeah,
And so now, if things are different with a lot of the unions today, from the well, I'm sure we'll talk about Donald Trump later on, but back
yeah,
then that was clearly the case. And so it didn't matter how much you supported it. When they pressed the Democrat blanket vote for all Democrats button, you were toast.
yeah,
But you didn't
yeah.
you didn't know it
Did
until it was
did
done.
did have a chance,
Yeah.
but I'll also say that hindsight's 2020, and I'm glad it all happened the way it did. But
Yeah.
I had no clue what I was doing, and because of that, looking back now that I have been successful and have the benefit of hindsight, I had no business running, other than a lot of times in politics. Uh, hey, we've got 3 Democrat incumbents. We just need Republicans to run
Right.
against them. Just name on the ticket,
Right.
just so they don't walk into office.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that is what it is. Um, and I fell into that. Um, it was Chris Crabtree
Mhm.
had said, he said, you were the only, and this was the off year municipal election, so really nothing was going on. He said, you were the only municipal clerk treasurer candidate that we knew about outside of your little bubble. And I think that happened because I didn't know what I was doing. So nobody was there to tell me no. I was just throwing it out there and
Right.
seeing what stuck.
Right.
Um, and then I met you all.
Yeah.
Um, what was your because after that I went to work for Jim Wallace for all of 4 months.
Yeah.
Which again was another foray. Foray?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
4A? Sure.
Yeah.
Hashtag grammar. Um, into politics that I had no business in. I
Sure.
mean, um, signature gathering, I'll say now, I ran that thing,
Yeah.
and the fact that I ended as, "Hey, you were a failed clerk treasurer candidate in Dyer," and 4 months later, 5 months later, I'm arguing in front of the state election board
Yeah.
about these 4 or 5 signatures that, um, it's so much time has passed now that it's fine to say they should have counted. I believe that they should have counted. They didn't count because Jim Walz didn't wanna hire an attorney who knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And, the signature should have gone back to Marion County to say, "No, look, we've verified this. We've double checked this on our own. These are errors. It gets us over the threshold." But we didn't do that. We decided to argue that before the election commission. They're like, "Well, too
Well, and
bad, so sad."
Dan Dumasich was the chair at the time, wasn't
He
he?
was, and I not to, uh I'm careful what
Careful.
I say. Careful, careful, careful.
Careful.
There are things that are, just a foregone conclusion, and maybe even saying that is bad, but you knew Pence was gonna be on the ticket.
Yep.
You knew this. But, I mean, even just, several years prior, I mean, I think it was John McCain did not have enough signatures in Indiana, but made it on the ballot. I
Right.
think it was McCain. Um,
Would make sense.
and and so I think going into it, we thought, well, there's been candidates in the past that didn't have 100 signatures in, the 7th, and they got them on anyways because typically these boards err on the side of, um,
Ballot
you know,
access. Yeah.
yeah, ballot access,
In fact, the law presumes that you're on the ballot until it is disproved that you are.
yes, and so for us to be knocked off in a way, I was like, That's kinda sketchy."
Yep.
It just
Yep.
it didn't, um my dad has always said, "You don't have to be fair, but you have to be consistent."
Consistent. Yeah.
And that kicking Jim off the ballot, in my estimation, wasn't consistent with past practice. But having said that, 2 days later, I get the call from the Pence team that
Yeah.
said, "Hey," I you know so I must have unknowingly done something right or held myself up enough to,
Yeah. Well,
you know
and I thought you knew this, maybe you didn't, but I remember because I was there, because I was on Team Pence. I was on Team Pence
Mhm.
pretty early,
Yeah.
because the field had been cleared, right? Like everybody thought that our first female governor was going to be Becky Skillman, the
Yeah.
lieutenant governor at the time for Mitch Daniels, and of course Pence, who was clearly his time. Essentially a coronation occurred, and the speed bump was Jim Wallace, and
Yeah.
they took care of that speed bump. But I remember the day after the election commission, because I was there, I sat there, I watched the whole thing. Mitch Robe, I think, was the one who argued, or was knocking you guys off the ballot, if memory serves. Which he's now the FSSA commissioner or
Yeah.
secretary. I talked to Crabtree, and Crabtree called me because clearly you were on his mind, and he asked me what kind of dude you were. And I said, yeah, you know what? He worked for Wallace, but you know what? He's new to this. I mean, same thing. Like I was
Yeah.
also relatively new and untested even at that point. I'm helping run municipal races, things like that, but nothing that would have ever caught the eyes of a downstater. And I
Yeah.
remember him asking me what kind of person you were, and I said, I think what you see is what you get with Bob. And clearly, he made the call for you to come and be a part of, operating or actually running the Northwest Indiana Victory Center that you did, which was clearly the linchpin in Pence's win.
I have said it now. History is written by the victors. My mother is responsible
That's
for the
great.
modern day Republican Party. I
Yeah.
have said it on this podcast before, and I defy anybody to challenge that.
Yep.
For the same reason why the sky is blue, water is wet, and north is always up. My
That's
my
true.
my mother
That's true. That's true.
said
I watched. I
said
watched
that.
those. I watched those phones smoke.
Yeah,
She was
yeah.
rolling
So
them.
I'll
Yep.
always say that too.
Yep.
As my sister would say,
Yeah. That's
that's my
awesome.
mom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so I got on there, and boy, was that an eye-opening experience.
Yeah.
You're a few years younger than I am,
Yeah.
but we're in the same age cohort, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, I was old for that job.
Sure. Yeah.
I really felt that, and, um, and I think that's why they get a lot of these kids in their 20s. We see that with races today as I look into the camera, because you know who I'm talking about,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
these little whippersnappers
Uh-huh.
out there,
Uh-huh.
but they can be everywhere. They can scroll social media 24/7 because they have no responsibilities.
Right. Right. They're totally
And
owned. They have
yeah,
no other yeah, they have no other
yeah,
responsibilities. They're
yeah,
totally owned. Yeah.
and and they have a good work ethic to say, "Hey, if I put in good now, that'll be the catalyst."
Right.
Where at this point, man, I already had my personality set. So, when we do the weekly or nightly conference calls about, and all these, hey, we did this and that. It's like, I don't have time for this. You got the same report I did. You don't need me to say it to you. If the Indiana Republican Central UHAs, whatever, just want me to say, hey, the report that you got that said we made 1,000 calls. Hey, my name's Bob Starkey. If that's what you want and make you
Right.
feel better. But I had no patience for a lot of it. But I think because I was older, I mean this in a way that you and I are gonna know. I think because I was older, I was better. Where
Sure.
the young kids, they need a lot of that hand holding.
Right.
And I've taken that through even my work career. It's, at some point it's like, "Hey, I get what you're asking for me, but I also know what you want from me.
Right.
And so if I
Right.
just give you that, then we're
And,
good."
and you're also not looking for the opportunity that they're looking for, which is a chance to shine so that they can move up the ladder. You're several rungs up that ladder at that point in
Yeah.
maybe not necessarily in terms of the job you hold, but in age and experience and the things you've done. And you've run for office and all these different things. And these young bucks are not in that place, right? And so they are foaming at the mouth to get on the phone call in front of some political director that's in charge of their field operation to say, look how many calls my team made today. Look how many doors we knocked. Look how many Lincoln days we went to and rubber chickens that we ate.
Yeah.
No. I mean, at that point, and that I mean, even today, I hate going to any Republican event. I'm a diehard conservative Republican. Will be the rest of my life. And the Lincoln days serve a purpose and fundraising, all these things, especially for smaller counties. I just I have no reason to perform in those places anymore. But there is
I
a generation of people that need to and are.
There is, and you see them. Now, I like going to them only because, um, for for those of you listening, Mike, you live down in the Indy area. I'm just gonna say Indy just
Yep.
because that's the mothership
Right.
of things. So, on the off chance that I do something once a year politically outside of Lake County, I enjoy it just to see friends and folks that
Right.
I haven't seen in a while.
Right.
But other than that, my I have no desire to go
And
to
I yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's a hierarchy in terms of who those Lincoln days serve.
Right.
It's not us.
No. No, no, no,
We're not served by that.
no.
They do a great job for um the rank and file, the precinct committeemen, those
Yep.
folks that are volunteering, knocking doors, making phone calls, just being, you know, beloved advocates in the community. That's a chance for them to gather, build some morale, see a fun speaker.
Yep.
You and I are so freaking jaded that, you know,
With a
some
capital J.
yeah, we we'll get into that shortly, folks. Um, some of these I I have to watch my response a lot of times because
Yeah.
I'm trying to build an organization here in Dyer. I'm trying to have influence in Lake County
Right.
with it, not because I want to go anywhere with it, just because I think it's the right thing to do. It's a skill set that I have, but I have to watch my reaction when someone's like, "Oh wow, the state senator stopped by and said everything." It's like,
Yeah. Well,
I just don't get I do not get starstruck anymore.
and the things that we do now and where we are. I mean, I'm working in the state house at least for couple more days, and but I walk by the comptroller 3 times a day.
Yeah.
I text with the attorney general about XYZ. I see the governor rolling in and rolling out every day, and any event that he's at, there's a good chance that I might be at too. And so you see that all the time. And so before, where you want to get a picture taken with him, you want to have a conversation, you want to get your foot in the door. You're right. You're jaded. There's no starstruck. There's no stardom about that anymore. Not that they don't serve a purpose and that we don't work with them and that we don't support them and things
Oh,
like
and that
that.
there's not
You know.
not even that there's I mean,
Yeah.
there's clearly a respect.
Yeah.
I just, it's kinda fun watching other folks line up for their opportunity
Right.
to get these photo ops.
Right.
Um, for quite some time, and, don't get you and I are both fanatic picture takers. We
Right.
just
Right. Right.
we do that, but
Right.
I think we do it for our own posterity, not,
Yeah.
you know, um anything else. But to watch some of these folks get so excited, again, that's what the purpose of it is.
Right. Right.
Um, uh, so now that we've gone down this way, I want to lasso it back
Right.
to. So here we are. Now we're in 2012. We are, you know, working to get pence in.
Yeah.
You're working to get some house folks in. I think you were working. Uh,
Yeah, so I worked at Hoosiers for Economic Growth at the end of 2011 after the municipal races were over, and then got hired on with the House Republican Campaign Committee to run 5 primaries. One of them being Doug Gutwein, who had a challenger just south of the Kankakee, and then after he won
Southern Indiana, for
Southern
those of
Indiana,
you that are
yeah,
listening.
for listening from Southern Indiana,
Southern
and then
Indiana.
once he got past the primary, he had no challenge. And then, as you recall, at the time in which we were running in 2012, we didn't have a single state senator or single state representative from Lake County. We had some
Right.
coverage coming over from, I think it was like Ed Saladay. I think at the time his district kind of
Yeah,
kicked
it
into Lake County a
dipped
little
from Porter
bit,
County
but
and
he was from
ours.
Porter County, right? And there's a big difference. While it's still the region, there's a big difference between Valparaiso and Maryville, or Whiting, or anything like, or even
The
Michigan City.
region.
Right? Yeah, and it's still the region, but the Lake County is really the epicenter of all of that.
Yeah.
It's the furthest to the left, but there we had nothing, and so there was a ton of money. And speaking of Dan Dumazich, one of the people who funded a lot of that, or brought people in to help fund that, also,
Yeah.
we had a golden opportunity to pick something up. And so I was the field manager for that. I had been picked up, and it was because of that time in the 2010 cycle that we talked about at the beginning, where we brought a bunch of young people together to knock doors and be a part of what was going on, and we made waves. And so, having been kind of the figurehead of that, that's how I got hired in that role to work in 2012. And then I kind of served as an advisor to Crabtree and the guys. I mean, you were obviously the staff on the ground, but between you and I think we became the Northwest Indiana Brain Trust.
What a sad state of affairs. It's that meme that says, I showed up one day and I accidentally became important.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And I'm like, why are you asking me? Well, you're the senior guy now. Crap.
Well, and
Yeah.
again, hindsight is what is. I could never have imagined. And again, you are close to the mothership, so you get these calls on a fairly regular basis. But on an oddly regular basis, for me to get phone calls, I'm always confused by that. And
Yeah.
and we've had, um, I don't even need to mention their names, but I've had a handful of folks reach out, and just for thoughts or advice, because I see now when folks get elected, the higher up the ladder they climb, their circle gets smaller.
Hmm.
And it's not because they are all of a sudden introverted or trust people less. It's that it takes so much work to get there that those people that they trust,
Yeah.
almost a blind trust that says, "Hey, if I give Mike this, Mike is going to perform, execute, and I don't have to worry about it."
Right.
Once you become those people, and like you said, at some point, I became one of those people in Northwest Indiana,
Right.
and so to get calls from state reps or senators or these
Right.
people be, "Hey, what's going on over there?"
Right.
It's something I never would have thought of, as I'm there
Yeah.
knocking doors. Hey, I'm
Right.
Bob. I'm your
Yep.
clique treasurer. I don't know
Right.
what I'm doing, but you know, 2 plus 2 equals 4. And um, I'm also it was a very humbling experience. And you've had a loss too.
Yeah.
But the what you learn from a loss is more than any postmortem that you do on a victory.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my god, that was
Yes.
well, I mean, the learning opportunity was, hey, fast forward a few years and I'm hanging out at the White House. I'm
Yep.
walking around the State House. I'm,
Right.
on the tarmac with the Air Force Too. I'm doing all these things because I failed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
boy, if that's not a good Opus clip later on too, but
I mean, seriously, had you won that
yeah.
race, you would not have been hired,
No.
and
No.
that'd be it.
And
Now, maybe you would have come down a path of being elected somewhere else at some point down the line. I mean, who knows the path that wasn't traveled, right? But we
yeah.
know for sure where you wouldn't be, and it
Yeah.
would never have been probably in the Pence orbit.
How did you link up with the Pence people?
2010, my pastor, Ron Johnson, he was leading with the Indiana Family Institute, an organization called the Indiana Pastors Alliance, and I was a part of kind of the policy team and kind of serving that, and that was essentially gathering pastors from across the state to speak into political and ideological matters, and they were having these. Like 5 or 6 of them across the state, kind of these meetings, and Mike Pence was the speaker at several of them. And the first one that we had was Northwest Indiana. And I think at this time, after Pence, I know he was running for Congress, but maybe it was right at the beginning of 2011. So maybe 2010, 2011. But Crabtree was already working for me that time, so I'd have to ask him what the time frame was. He had just left Becky Skillman's office as chief of staff to come and work as the political director for the Pence campaign, and Crabtree and Pence show up at this meeting, and that at Indiana Wesleyan in Maryville, back there behind where the celebration station used to be, and all that
Yeah.
stuff right there along where Rubino's is at, and off of
Say
65
it.
and 30. What's
Say
that?
it.
No,
Say it.
I'm not gonna say it.
Hooters.
Oh, I wasn't going to say that. Are they even in business? I know a bunch of them are going out of business. That's not what this is about, but
I don't
I don't
know.
know if that one's going out of business. But it doesn't matter. Abuela's was
I I
back
I, ju-
there.
I just watched you Google Map every single
Not a thing.
establishment
Hands
around
right
there.
here. Hands. I'm not typing anything. Like a casino, you gotta when you leave the table, you gotta show that you don't have any
Yeah.
coins in your pocket. And so Pence came to speak at this Indiana Pastors Alliance event, and there was, I don't know, 67, 80 people, and I was a part of helping organize it because I was serving at the church, and Dr. Ron in that ministry and helping them.
Mhm.
And he was a speaker, and and in fact, I got a picture of the first time I ever met him. I actually had hair, which was incredibly amazing. That's where I met them, and we got connected because Pence did a bunch of those events, and then he wanted to be plugged in more and more with pastors because he was, is a man of faith, and knew that in his lead up to run for governor was going to need coalitions like that. And if there's a
Yeah.
master of building coalitions, it's Chris Crabtree.
Mhm.
And I got lumped into those coalitions, but then started to kind of lead in the Northwest Indiana side, because every time he'd come Northwest Indiana, I'd get to be a part of what he was doing. And then eventually, as you got hired and they kind of built their apparatus around, I was part of that Northwest Indiana circle. And that's how I met him. So yeah, probably early 2011, if I had to guess. Now that I think about it.
S- How some of these um, candidates, high profile candidates, elected officials at really the highest levels, um, how they form some of their campaign groups, I think would astonish people
Yeah,
that it's a combination of skill, but also just personal feelings.
yeah,
That I've got a gut feeling about this guy.
yeah.
You talked to, like not unlike you said what happened with me. Hey, I like Mike Neal, so if I'm Chris Crabtree, I'm going to ask Mike Neal. Hey, I think I got a vibe on this guy. What do you think? Okay, vibes mess up, and then there you go. Here's the keys. We trust you.
Yeah.
Go. And
Well, you say that, and it's funny. I was reviewing as I build the podcast that I'm building. I'm looking at old videos and podcasts of other people who have been on radio, and one of those people, in fact, in my office, you can't see it here, but I have the radio's greatest of all time, Rush Limbaugh. I have his book that his wife and his brother wrote, and I was reviewing some old 2010, 2012 clips of Rush Limbaugh and some of the things that he did, and how he spoke and what he spoke about, and how, what kind of stories he got. And what he was talking about in this particular piece that I was looking at was when Chris Christie, at the time the governor of New Jersey, is getting ready to run for president the first time around, and how when they were getting ready to make the announcement, and then this is what Rush was chastising, is that he had put out the call to all of his big donors. And those are the people that were going to stand on the stage with him to make his announcement. And then you have people like Mike Pence, who's coming to pastors' events at Indiana Wesleyan University. And what it shows is we were just off the heels of the largest swing in, I think, U.S. representatives history, even more than the contract with America back with Newt Gingrich. I think that the Tea Party switch in 2010, when Obama was in office, was the largest swing in history. Don't quote me, but I think it was, if not one,
It's
number two.
quoted,
It
timestamp
quote
40 minutes,
done.
39 seconds.
And that was because it was a change from all those years before, where everything was top down. It's donor class, and it's the big wigs, and then all the peons are just going to do their thing. And it's like, no, no, no. The peons are who are running this thing. And I think that's why Pence was so wildly successful. Just like, again, we'll talk about this later, why Jim Banks was so wildly successful in knocking off any major challenge to his candidacy, Pence doing the same, is because it came from a groundswell at the bottom that lifted and rose all boats, rather than the boats already being on top telling people at the anchor what to do. And there's two ways that campaigns are run. And sometimes both can be successful in certain places and ways. And of course, New Jersey being a very rough and tumble state in politics.
Yes.
Indiana's just not that. That's not who we
No,
are.
and there are, you're right. How many times have we talked in politics how you've got the money people and the grassroots people,
Yep.
and neither one can work without the other.
Correct.
If you're the
That's
donor
right.
class and you don't have anybody to knock on doors or to put out the
Right.
signs,
Yep.
your money doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Vice versa, if you've got an army of people but $3 and nothing
Yep.
to hand out, nothing,
Yep.
you're not going to go anywhere. So you're right; those two things can exist at the same time.
Correct. Right.
With folks like Jim Banks, and that, and I almost feel like in saying this, we're giving away the golden goose here. But if I were to talk to anybody running any primary whatsoever, I'd say your job is to establish that it's a foregone conclusion that you are the candidate.
Right.
And so that means establishing those groups, getting the pastors together, getting the veterans together, getting first responders, law enforcement together. And next thing you know, you've got someone in every group that is influential, and you're just the guy. And I think Jim Banks' campaign, rust aside, again, a very Jim Wallace, ladies and gentlemen, a Jim Wallace speed bump. I mean, aside from that, it was Jim Banks is the guy, and that started out with, "Hey, you need to, everybody in the world." There was 6 months of everybody in the world. There was a
there was an
dog
endorsement every other day.
catcher.
Yep.
Yes.
Everyone
And
from every level, which showed wide support. It wasn't just the donor class. It wasn't just the elected officials. It was organizational leaders. It was business leaders. It was people from Main Street. That's why it was so wildly successful for Jim. And Pence was. I mean, I don't think he put out those type of endorsements like that, but it was that same kind of groundswell that started from the bottom and worked its way up, rather than coming and trickling down, which doesn't always work.
We had one in 2012. At the end of 2012. And at what point did you? I did this once in my life where I decided to move away. Beck and I had just gotten married. We moved to Pittsburgh, and we lived in Pittsburgh for 3-4 years, and then came back. It just, for a million reasons, some of which her and I would still probably butt heads on. We're family people. We just need to be near family.
Yeah.
2012, there's the Pence victory. some time passes, and you make the choice to go to Indy, go to the mothership. And that was to work for, Pence. You had gotten a
Right.
job in the governor's office. Uh, I don't know, assistant to the general manager, whatever the title was. Um, but what was that like for you? You weren't married at the time.
Yeah.
Aside from a historical tie, you didn't I didn't think you had tie. Let me put it this way: you were in a spot where you could be more mobile.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
so they originally tried to get me to come down there in 2013 at the beginning, and it was to come to work for Jeff Cardwell, who was the executive director or director of the Faith Based and Community Initiatives office. And at the time, I don't think
yes,
they really, and I didn't learn till later what they had, what their options were for that, for that entity. And I came down there and I actually interviewed with Jeff. And I think it may be the first time I met Jeff Cardwell, who is another person who has enabled me so much, has been a mentor to me, and still is to this day. We're helping raise money for the organization he's a part of, all, helping people across the world. But I interview with him, and then like 2 weeks later, they shut down the agency.
yes, and I knew that from a different perspective. At this time, I was at the Department of Labor, so I was down at Government Center South a lot,
Yeah, yeah.
and they had an office there. And at some point, as you're down there, I thought, oh, he was there to shut it down.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't think they knew at the time that's what they were, because they started interviewing people. I think they were, in case we keep it, we need to start lining people up, and then
Yeah,
they closed it. And what I think they did is they rolled that into some stuff in the governor's office. They rolled it into other places in government, and so then I'm like, okay, well this door is closed, so I'm going to be available to them anytime they come to Northwest Indiana and advance. And if they call me to come downstate and help them advance or do something, I'll do it. And then in late 2014, and we need to get into when I ran for office there. That's part of this story too. In 2014, I ran for township board for a guy who had won the primary and died 7 days before the election, and got put on the ballot 6 days before the election and won. But in that time, while even before I started running that race, Crabtree was kind of knocking on my door and said, "Hey, would you ever consider moving down here to come actually work in the governor's office, in on the advance team, on the external operations team? Somebody's getting ready to move on from their role, and we need to fill it very quickly." And at that point, I was so jazzed in 2013 to move, and then once I didn't, I was, in 2014, I had picked up contracts to run 11 local races and help, build organizations there in Cherville and Lake County and Dyer and St. John, all that kind of, those races that were going on there, from state rep down all the way down to township board. And So they were, talking back and forth with me for several months. And in fact, I think there was a Chris Christie event where Crabtree finally told me there at the Radisson Star Plaza, which is gone now. But
yeah,
at the Radisson Star Plaza, where he had that fundraiser or whatever event it was, and he talked and said, and I think at this point I knew that I was getting on the ballot. It was right before the election, and in 2014, and I told Crabtree, I said, "Hey, I'm running for this office and I'm going to win." I said, "If I take the oath of office before I have an official offer, I'm going to stay here. If I don't take the oath of office and you make me an offer, I'll come." And so as soon as the election was over and I won, it had to be like 2 days. And Crabtree calls and makes a firm offer to
yeah.
come fill a spot, director of community affairs, and come be on the advance team and come
Some
lead
government
some
title.
title, right? And right then and there, because I was free, right? I had no wife.
Yeah.
I had an apartment that I could pick up at any time. I had a supportive friends in church who knew, since 2010, I really was engaging in the political sphere. And what an opportunity to be sucked down into,
Yeah.
at the time, the most conservative governor's office in a generation in Indiana. And so everyone's like, "Of course you go. You go."
Yeah.
And so, and you take a big pay cut because you're going to go work for this guy who's going to be something other than governor one day, just a lot faster than the rest of us thought. And you go. And so I moved, and I remember I had a bunch of friends move me down to an apartment in Greenwood, Indiana, in December, and I started January 5th of 2015 on one of the greatest adventures that to this day will be one of the highlights of my life, and it's working for Mike Pence in the governor's office.
What and we don't have to talk about this, if you don't want to, because it is somewhat critical of, the two governors since the former one and the current one. Um, why? And maybe nobody even. How maybe the people watching this will care because they know us and they know we're probably going to talk politics. Why does you know, external affairs, external operations, advance, why does that now take a back seat? And I think that when I look at the tenure of Eric Holcomb and some of the public perception issues that Braun may or may not have, um, in my mind, maybe it's because I became somewhat of an advanced guy, and so I just think that's the most important thing. Where if there
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
a governor's cabinet position of underwater basket weaving, that may be the most important thing. But I always thought that having a good, polished, front-facing operation really smoothed a lot of things over,
Yeah.
and I think I saw that take a back seat
You did.
very quickly.
You did.
And do you think that is because and I didn't know anybody before Pence. I was I don't have a My Man Mitch shirt, I thought he did a fantastic job. We are still standing on his shoulders doing some of the things that we have in
Right.
Indiana.
Right.
Clearly he was the catalyst for everything we're enjoying now.
Yeah.
Um, where we can say the 14 reasons we're better than Illinois,
Right.
that
Right.
was Mitch Daniels.
Right.
Um, he had a different idea on, you know, advance and external operations, some of those things. Pence came in, I think, with a very polished Washington D.C. take on it, perhaps.
Yeah.
Um, but that's been set by the side. Do you have? This is going to sound very very interviewy. Do you have any
No,
thoughts on that?
I do, 100%. I mean, and Mitch, now Mitch had a different magic. He didn't need the advanced side because he walked in from DC as the director of the Office of Management and Budget at the White House to a state that was $800 million in the hole on its biennial budget in the, I guess, fiscal 2003 or fiscal 2003, 2004. And
Yeah.
so he came in and ran on this state is absolute crap and we've got to fix it. And then he fixed it, right? And it was hard measures, and he was unpopular originally, and his reelection didn't look great. If you 2 years out, he was
Yeah.
his approvals were down at his ankles, and there was and of course then he came to win. I think one of the greatest landslides in history back then in 2008 when he got reelected. The same time that President Obama won Indiana,
Yeah.
he won Indiana in a big way as Mitch Daniels. And so but Mitch, and I remember talking to the state troopers with the executive protection detail, some of them who were on Mitch's detail, who were then later on Pence's detail, and they would say, yeah, he did not have much advance. He would stay at people's houses if he had to stay overnight. Where most
I had heard that he would
yeah,
often just
yep,
crash places
yep.
because
But he had that I just came and fixed the state, which is why people in 2012 were talking about him running for governor, and who myself as a young Politico, yes, absolutely, we send our governor to DC. He just fixed Indiana. You don't think he can fix this stuff too? Of course,
yeah.
Sherry Daniels didn't let him run, and the rest is history. He ran Purdue University, and now Purdue's tuition model is why Braun was able to announce a complete
A
freeze of all
freeze.
tuition. Right? It's still
Yeah.
built on the back of Mitch Daniels, and our current governor had the opportunity to build on that foundation. Then you get Pence, who has this DC, polish and the way things are. But I think he also had an eye to his future, right? If he had been called for 2 terms as governor and never did anything else, I think he would have been perfectly happy. But I think he was set for such time as this to do exactly what he did, and we saw that, right? We from hog roasts to major announcements on highways to crises. Mike Pence always looked good. The
Yeah.
background always looked crisp. He looked like someone who could be a commander in chief even though maybe one day he was never going to do anything like that in the White House. Maybe he would have been a U.S. senator after, who knows what would have happened as the pieces fell into place. But he was, and this is something that I try to espouse in my life, always be ready for the thing you don't know you're going to get tapped on the shoulder for to come and do. You want to have the credentials when you get, you don't want to be wholly unqualified when you walk up to it. You don't know what that's going to be, right? I'm
Yeah.
not saying that I'm doing all this so one day I could run for Congress, but you know what? If I get the opportunity one day to run for Congress, I'll be able to look back at all the experiences I got to do and all the things I got to say and be a part of, and then offer that to the electorate as my here's what I feel like I can do for you. And so Pence did that, and it worked, right? Because we built a vice president of the United States.
On flag spreaders
Yes.
and spotlights.
Yes. And big, beautiful seals,
Yeah.
and yes, and
Do you am I
plans.
allowed to
Yeah.
say this? Do you still have one of the seals?
I
Blink once or twice. No.
can't. I don't have one,
Okay.
but I can't answer anything about that on. I was gonna say on the radio on a podcast. I have
Don't
other
worry.
things. I mean, you see, let's see if I can put my finger. That helmet was something that he got. That says Mike Pence on it. It was a fire helmet that Pence allowed me to have walking out the door. Just, I think, a gift somebody got. I mean, I've got some, memorabilia from that time. You've probably
I've
got
got
something.
on mine here. I don't want to pan the camera because it takes a
Yeah.
lot to like not shine
Yeah.
on any of this, so everything's got to stay. But I do have random Pence
Yeah.
memorabilia
Yep.
around.
Yep.
Oh, you know what I do have? Oh, here.
Oh, there you go.
Here we'll put this up here. Mike, you'll appreciate this one here.
Yeah, it is. There it is. Your mom making the calls. That's
Yep,
right.
that right there.
That's great. Okay, well, if you've got yours. Let's see. I've got one.
Yeah.
I've got the time I was
Oh,
briefing
orange
him in the
pants.
orange pants,
Orange
baby.
pants. I remember
That's
orange pants.
That's
I remember
right.
that story.
He was in the car making fun of me as he was pulling up. Why is Mike Neal wearing orange pants? And he thought it was real funny until he found out he had to put some on too if he wanted to tour the hot strip mill over there at U.S. Steel.
Now, one of the times I don't know if you remember this. This you may not even know this story. Maybe you do. The road cone story.
Yeah. Yes.
He
Yes.
looked like a damn road
Yeah.
cone.
Yeah.
And he burst out laughing. Now he was always very composed. Now
Yes.
in private, extremely jovial.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a couple good stories that I mean, unless I'm with you and friends, and we've already shared these. They don't go out here. It's not for public consumption.
Right.
They're my stories. They're
Right.
mine.
That's right.
And it's
That's right.
they're mine. An amazing sense of humor.
Right.
Even somewhat at times a little twisted, which I personally enjoyed. But I will not forget, and I think it was from those orange pants. It was something where
Probably.
I said,
Sure it was.
you look like a
But
damn
yeah.
road cone
Yep.
or
Yep.
a road barrel or
That's right.
something."
Yep.
And
But to your question on advance, and then Eric Holcomb was just much more. Mike Pence was a polished leader and a family man and a man of faith and a great speaker, and Eric Holcomb comes on the scene, and he's a much more of a relatable person, right? I remember the first time I ever advanced him when he was lieutenant governor, and we were at the Alexander, which is a hotel in Indianapolis on the south side of downtown. And he was doing an event and he had all this time on the front end of it. And I was like, okay, well, we're going to put the principal somewhere. And so there's a restaurant there and he wants to go have breakfast. And so we go find him a table, whatever. He goes, no, everybody sit down. So the whole advance team sits down, the state troopers protecting him sit down, and everybody has breakfast with him. And I had never experienced it. Not that Pence wasn't hospitable, not that Pence wasn't very, very thankful that you were there and loved you like family.
There was a
different.
different level of approachability.
Yep, just different. And Eric was very relatable, but in that relatability, I think what it also created was, well, I don't want to look manufactured,
Yeah.
right? I want to look relatable. And so I think part of that took a backseat because of that mentality. And this is not an indictment on Eric. There's going to be a lot of people that listen to this who are huge Eric Holcomb fans who built their career on Eric, like we built our career.
I'm gonna get a hate
on
text
Mike
over the My Man Mitch thing.
Sure,
I just didn't have the green sign.
But Holcomb didn't get to go do something after this, and maybe he didn't want to. right?
Yeah.
I just, and now the same thing with Braun. Braun comes in with this big business background that he built a huge business out of, essentially from nothing. And created this big business that now does a lot of work here in Indiana and makes things, in parts across the United States. And he just came in a different style, right? He ran for U.S. Senate against, Todd, and
Yeah, and I
it was
and,
just different, right? The blue shirt and the
uh,
that commercial with the cardboard cutouts, and
you
amazing,
can't see it the way
just
it's
different.
kept, but this is Braun, and I only say that in jest because, look, I watch TV and I'm just doing this, but I also get the sense that perhaps why he's not a big fan of the advance and that polish is, again, just as an observer, in my estimation, while I say that a lot, I think he had a disdain for DC and DC
Yeah,
politics. I think
yeah,
that's why he came back, and
yeah,
I wonder how much of that polish that he experienced out there for 6 years is, I don't want that.
yeah,
Let me just walk into a room, talk with some folks,
yep.
I'll get back in the car and leave.
Yep, and again, very relatable. Like every conversation I've ever had with Mike Braun has always been incredibly pleasant, and has always been incredibly kind. And he comes off as someone, again, who's relatable. I could probably get a beer with the guy, right? Like that's the kind of the way he comes off. It's different than Eric, but it's because he comes from this business background, right? And he comes with the rolled up blue sleeve shirt. He's not trying to impress anybody. Pence, and speaking of, when I was talking about going back and listening to radio clips, I've found several radio clips when Mike Pence had his radio show when he was
Oh,
living
yeah.
in southern Indiana. And so even thinking about that, right? Everything was framed. He framed arguments. He read, just like what we're doing right now. We're podcasting. They were just doing it on radio, right? We're doing the same thing they did. They had the cool microphones and they had the nice setup and they had the lights and they had whatever. And he was on radio. And then there are these clips of him doing those things, right? And so he always has had an optical mind, And so then he just said, "I want these optics for me." Just Holcomb and Braun haven't felt the need to do that. Now that doesn't mean that that's an indictment on Braun and
No,
what he
no,
could do
it's,
later, right?
you know
That's entirely up to him. And really, they've been in. I got to give this too. They've just been in office 6 months, right? It takes you a year just to figure out where all the
where the
doors
bathrooms
go,
are.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, there's plenty of time for him to and he had his first session and it was a tough one with property taxes, and I'm sure we'll get to that later, but there was just there's so much he walked into, and the Medicaid shortfall, all those things. They haven't had time to think about those things, and there's definitely plenty of time for him to shape things the way he wants to be, including his future. And maybe his future is be governor and be done. Maybe it's something else. That's and Courtney, entirely up to him. But I do think that advance really does make the difference in moving up to the next stage. I don't think it's. There are very few Mitch Daniels. There are more non-Mitch Daniel polished people in government today than
Yeah.
than the Mitch Daniels. That just they don't entirely exist. The workhorses don't entirely exist all the time.
No.
You know, maybe Braun's going to be a workhorse. Maybe that's what he's going to build out, and maybe he will do that. Time will tell. And I'll be interested to see how that turns out.
I,
The cup
it
that makes me thirsty every time you do it.
it
No, it's just
it does. I find that, um so I've been told, in addition to this, I have, a couple shows on, the local radio station, um, the Town of Dyer show, which we filmed this morning, Region Republican show, which we had, Micah Beckwith
yeah,
on Monday. Um, if you haven't got a chance to watch any of the clips, I brought him on like a half hour before, so he did the morning drive
right.
call-in show with us, um, and we're like jumping ahead in the timeline here, but I gotta tell you, um, uh, speaking of approachable people, and I think it was because of, where he comes from, his background of, just that
Hmm.
faith-based, I mean, you have to be approachable in that,
Right.
nobody's going to, engage with a pastor who is icy and stoic, you need that
Right.
engagement. Um, but someone who, if I had some advice, because this is what you want advice from. If I had some advice, in terms of, hey, look at your future trajectory as a possibility, knowing that everybody has a possibility. Um, you could benefit from strong advance
Yep.
because he's got that personality, he's
Yep.
got the look. Um, and if you get a chance, Mike, as or listeners, go find it because it was
Yeah.
it was a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Um, we have jumped around in this timeline here. So I think this is why I said this could be a 4-hour thing. Um, so it's 2015. You're in the governor's office.
Yep.
Um, I remember when um, we were at the state fair right after the first Trump debate. And so this was when Pence was, not on the radar. Pence was
No.
running for governor again.
Right.
I'm sure there was some pundit somewhere, some Pete Seat dude. I see Pete. I did that. Some Pete Seat dude on CNN that threw out Pence's name just because at that point everybody, all of these surrogates, everyone is throwing out names to see what sticks. Because to
Right.
your point, you don't know when you're going to get tapped on the shoulder to
Right.
say, "Hey,
Right.
we need you second fiddle over here," and you're willing to do that. You just can't guess these things.
Right.
And so we were at I think this was the morning of your golf cart incident where the horn was stuck. Was that, or
Yeah.
was this the day after?
Yeah, that was
It,
that would have been it would have been real early in the morning because we were doing the pork breakfast, which is the rite of
mm,
passage that you
yeah,
have every year, and that's why the horn was such a problem because it's like it's got to be like 5 in the morning, and I'm
and it's
waking up
just blaring.
all the folks who are working there.
So my story is so you're with Pence that entire time. I
Yep.
remember, if I'm not mistaken, I think Hannah was driving a golf cart. uh,
Yes.
Pence was in the passenger seat.
Yes.
I think I was in the what do you call the seat that faces backwards? I
I
was there,
had.
but I
Yeah.
remember we were talking about that Trump debate, and again, so many of these conversations are just ours. But there was a wow. Did you see Trump on there? Because at this point, Trump's still the guy who's coming
Right.
down the stairs like,
Right.
what is this
Yeah.
unknown quantity?
This guy's gonna get 2%. This guy's gonna flame out. This guy's gonna be nothing. He'll be out. He'll be out before Iowa.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it was
He
a
breaks the
lot of the
mold.
conversation was that, and
Yeah.
and it was because nobody knew what Trump was.
Right. Right.
You just couldn't pick it, and so here we are, and it's a fond memory I have of American history that nobody else has. That the day after the first one, we're just kind of palling around with Pence in a golf cart and like doing this analysis of, hey, what was that
Right.
Trump thing all about? And
Right.
um I would be called to help if I was around. If you guys were doing something up in Northwest Indiana, I was right there with you.
Right.
Didn't need a paycheck, didn't need a thing. I take vacation, I come help. If I was
Right.
down in Indy, same thing. But you were there in the thick of it as
Yeah.
this thing started to ramp up.
Yeah.
What was it like for you to realize, okay, so um I started out with this, my church folks, I'm getting involved, I got with Pence, and I'm doing all these things, and I make the bold move to move down to Indianapolis, and I'm running around doing factory tours, and the next thing I know, I'm looking at, oh shoot, we're Trump is coming in to have a conversation with my guy.
Right.
My 4 years, 3 years, 4 years with the governor. He was governor 4 years. You were with him, I think 3 of it, officially.
Right.
Is uh, we're something is happening here that, and you were, at least when I say on the inside, you were on the inside, but you were in the office for that.
Yeah.
Where's the headspace go for that?
It didn't really dawn on me other than like, the news was saying a few things leading up to, well, let's go back to Pence not endorsing Donald Trump.
Yeah.
let's start there, right? At this point, there are three people left in the race. It's Donald Trump, it's Kasich, and it's Squidward, Ted Cruz from Texas, and
He endorsed Cruz, didn't
he
he?
endorsed Cruz very
Yeah.
tepidly. And then I remember getting the tap on the shoulder, essentially saying, "We got to do all we can to help Cruz," And so Pence is barnstorming the state with him. I'm helping do events on my own time, with
I
him,
I
and
I have there was a handful of events, um, that, I was advancing
yeah,
for Cruz,
yep,
and,
yeah,
I didn't even think about it until I was looking through for pictures of us,
right.
and I just had just a ton because I thought, "Well, this is interesting." In fact, somewhere it was one of the Lincoln days that Ted Cruz was at, and they had his name tag, which
Oh
he wasn't gonna wear a name tag,
no, of
and
course
so
not.
I had him sign it,
Yeah,
and I've got that
yeah.
tucked away in a drawer
I've
somewhere.
got something with his signature, and at the time that the where he announced that if I win Indiana, I'm going to make Carly Fiorina my vice president. And
Yeah,
they did a joint event in Indianapolis here somewhere, and I've got the tag somewhere because I had them both sign it just in case. I mean,
yeah,
the polls didn't look like they were going to win, but just in case they won,
yeah.
we were going to have that. But and so obviously Trump wins Indiana by a landslide. It actually puts him over the top in the electoral college. Indiana, first of all, Indiana hadn't mattered in our lifetime.
No,
In
never.
any presidential, I mean, I guess take that back. I guess it kind of mattered in the 2008 Democratic
8 with Obama,
primary with
but
Obama, Clinton, but for us as Republicans, it hadn't ever mattered, and then all of a sudden we mattered, and the nation has its eyes upon us. And what does Indiana do? It puts Donald Trump over the top. And so after that point, that's when everyone started to talk about the Veep stakes, where before any other time they would have been talking about that for months already, because sometime after Super Tuesday in February and March, this race would have been over, right? When McCain was knotted, when Romney was knotted before that, it had been done. And so you're already starting to do that. And so now Trump has a very short amount of time between that moment, May 5th or whatever that was, early May, to the Republican convention, which I'd have to look. I have the credentials over here. I'm trying to see. It looks like July 18th, 2016. So he's got 2 months to find a vice president to nominate to put him on the ballot. And so now they got to move quick to do this kind of stuff. And at that point, I think the last couple were Christie, Newt Gingrich, and Mike Pence. I think that was the big three that was the final. And I remember when he got interviewed the first time. I don't think I've ever told this story. And so this is breaking for you tonight. I don't even know if I've told you this story just because it's
put the
coming to my memory
crawler
now.
up.
I'm I'm in I'm in southern Indiana. I forget the town. Maybe it was Greensburg. And I remember just sitting on a town square. I'm sitting in my state SUV. We were advancing a stop and doing some things for Pence. And he's I don't know. Maybe I'm headed to the next one, but I'm stopped because I must have had some time. Maybe I grabbed some lunch or something. And I get a call from Jen Pavlik, and Jen was his director of operations. So she kind of held the schedule, kept everything together. And she calls me and she goes, "Hey," she goes, you're going to know why, but I'm not going to say it, but you're going to know why. And Mike Pence is supposed to be at the regatta in Madison, which is the big boat race. It's for the governor's cup. And the
Mhm.
governor always goes. And you've got to get him out of it because he has to go to New Jersey. And in New Jersey is Bedminster, which was one of the
Yeah.
places where a lot of those conversations were happening for Trump, Trump National there in Bedminster. And so I'm like, oh, crap. So I tag in the lieutenant governor, Eric Holcomb, to go do that event. And Pence goes there for an interview. And to my knowledge, that is the first one, other than when Pence and Trump spoke when he was trying to get Mike's endorsement for the primary.
Right.
This is the first time, to the best of my knowledge, that they're having a conversation about other than if there was a call of the vice presidency. And so he flew out there for like one day, and he flies back, and the next day he's doing so down here in Fisher, so east of where I live, is a place called Conner Prairie. And at Conner Prairie during the summer they do these big concerts. They call it Symphony on the Prairie, and it can be anything from Philip Sousa to Star Wars to Beatles night, and they just do these concerts throughout the entire summer. and they have like these VIP areas and tables, and you can bring your own food, you can buy stuff. There's wine, there's beer, everything. And there's this VIP tent, and Pence is scheduled to be there after he comes back from Bedminster. And so what happens? All the media comes because now they know it kind of leaked that he was gone from the regatta, and they had to ask why. And they're coming to ask him what he did. And I think he just was finally kind of. There's actually a picture on the news, and it's Karen and him and me, and we're all holding umbrellas because it's raining,
Yeah.
walking towards the cameras, and then I kind of bolt out to the side, and he can, kind of do his thing. And he had gone to meet with Trump, and that was the first time, to my knowledge, that he had met. And so we had to bury it as best as possible, but you can't have the governor not go to the governor's cup at the regatta and nobody
Yeah.
noticed, right? Eric
Yeah.
Holcomb and Mike Pence look totally different. Height
Yes.
alone, right? Hair color the same, everything else totally different, you know. And so that's when it starts to get real, to the point where now we know he's going out there more often and having conversations. And that all leads to the event. Weirdly enough, I live here in Westfield now, and I'm involved in Westfield government. We have a place called Grand Park, which is a big indoor soccer facility. We have tons of family sports and tournaments, from soccer and baseball and football. Everything happens here. But this big facility, and Trump is taking the last three people that he's got on his list, essentially out for a ride at a rally to see how they do. They're going to introduce Trump. And so he comes up here, and Pence does the whole opening and this whole event, and Trump comes, and it's great. And we're there. We had such a great time. It was a really cool event to be at. And then what's supposed to happen, and Trump is staying at the Conrad, and the big Fox News trucks and all the national media is here watching where he's at. And from this event, he's supposed to get in his motorcade and fly to Trump Force One, which is sitting at the Indianapolis airport. And he's supposed to leave and go see Chris Christie. And when they get there, or at some point from the event to the time they get to the plane, they are notified that one of the front tires is flat and maintenance is closed, and they're going to have to stay another night. They have to stay another night. And so they go back to the Conrad, and Trump, and at this point, Christie is freaking out. Don't you promise Pence anything before you see me? I mean, they are pulling out every stop. And what Trump calls Pence and says, "Hey, I'm still here. Why don't we have breakfast in the morning?" And so there's this video. I think it's out now. It's in one of the books, or a couple of these books that have been written about Mike, or if he's written it in his own. I forget. The book is. In fact, I have it real close. I have his book right here.
Yeah.
And so there's this video of him and Karen going out to, and one of the things that they added at the governor's residence was a garden, and they're out there like picking things to make breakfast for Trump and his entourage that next morning. And that is where it is believed, and to the best of my knowledge, what I understand, having been inside, know that's where the vice presidency was offered that next day at that breakfast. And of course, there was a lot after that to ensure that it occurred, right? Because Pence had to come off the ballot in such a weird way. And if he
Yeah.
got off the ballot, he may not be able to get back on. And so he had to make sure. Then there was that New York event, like on a Saturday. Pence had to fly out there to go essentially get crowned and
Yeah.
introduced. And the rest is history. And so it's a crazy
So
seatbelt's not doing any good.
so what was it like going out there flattening the tire for Trump Force One to make this happen?
I think because the NSA, I'm sure, is listening to this. I don't want Secret Service to know that.
Yeah, I know,
But
right?
what a crazy thing to happen. A flat tire that probably, because it's such a non-event, happens all the time on planes, right? And they
Yeah.
can just very quickly, just like I could go out there and change my tire, they probably have a very similar system. I mean, no one's out there with a crescent and doing the whole thing,
Yeah.
but they're someone's very quickly out there to change a tire or to patch it or to fix it or whatever. And the fact that maintenance is closed, and the fact that nothing they can do, and then he gets he gets asked to be the vice president the next day, to the chagrin of Chris Closed Beaches Christie.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I was gonna say Bridges.
that too. That's
Yeah.
a better one. I just
Yeah.
saw that picture of him and his family sitting on the beach when that drone found him.
Yeah.
Anyway.
My mom always said, and she really did not like politics, um, because she saw what was said about me when I was running. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm running for town council in a town of 16,000 people,
Right.
and you would think that I am the devil and I kick puppies. Back in 2019 when I was running, it's much different now. Now I can run on, you know, 6 years of a record,
Right.
and so it's totally different. But when you're, um, I had, and I'll get to this. My Ward One, has never had a Republican win, ever. In the history of Ward 1 being where it is, never. And so there was a lot coming at me, and she took it very personal, like, oh,
Yeah. Hmm.
that's my son.
Yeah.
And then when she sees, the stuff that Pence goes through, in her mind, she always had an affinity for him. She
Yeah.
she made a lot of phone calls for him. She did a lot of that type of campaign stuff that she
Yeah.
liked doing. In reality, we all know the story. I was in charge of that call center, getting folks to make calls on a regular basis, stuff, and she just wanted to spend some time with me, and she was good. So we spent 9 months together,
Yeah.
just making
Right.
phone calls, and so
Yeah.
that's the real story. But she didn't like how, um, they would treat Pence was always very nice to her.
Yeah.
I remember when she had made some type of milestone of calls, and he came into town and had brought her some flowers as a thank you, and just was always very kind to her. And so she did not like politics at all.
Yeah.
Um, she was excited to see Trump because she thought, well, this is somebody different who
Yeah.
you could attack him, but he didn't seem to be phased by it.
Teflon Don.
But she said, and she vocalized this in a way that, uh, I think folks like you and I just intuit. But it was interesting to watch her craft it from her worldview. She said
Sure.
Trump needed Pence because Pence was the stable conservative
Right.
that could reassure everyone that, okay, when you're clearly going to take a gamble on Trump,
Yep. Right.
right out the gate. Now in 2020, and then of course now it's a known quantity. You know what you're voting for, but then it was, I don't know exactly what's going on,
Yep.
and she said, America needed someone like Pence. A Chris Christie was just as bombastic in many
Yep.
ways.
Yep.
Wasn't going to happen. Any of the other, B string folks, it was,
Mm.
you needed that good little house on the prairie
Yep.
dad.
Yep.
You needed Michael Landon to say, look, he's okay. If something goes sideways, I'm here,
Yeah.
and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And so, which is when I go back to, um, you don't get Trump without Pence,
Right.
and you
The,
don't get Pence without Cindy Starkey.
when that's amen to that. There was before the Indy Star got rid of its cartoonist Gary Varvel, which is a name I know you know,
Yeah,
who's a conservative cartoonist. The cartoon that led with the very thing you just articulated. It's this drawing of the Republican elephant, says GOP, and Pence has got his hit the elephant's hand, and then he's got Trump's hand on the other side, and he's like trying to obviously join them, and you can see that the elephant is turned away from Trump, but because Pence is standing there, its eyes are looking back at Trump, and it's
yeah,
it's the articulation in a drawing of what you just said, and what your mom, said probably long before that was drawn.
yeah,
But that was the sentiment in America. Yeah, Chris
and
Christie couldn't have done it. No, nobody else could have done that.
nobody,
Nobody.
and I think why that story sticks with me is because, um, every everything that was, I want to phrase this right. And so if this comes out, there's no disrespect to this, but every bit of, um, intelligence that my mother had came from two things: street smart and gut feeling.
Yeah,
And she rested on those. She'll tell
yeah,
you she was not an academic.
yep,
She graduated early from high school when, when she got the points and the credits, and she could go in the late 70s. She was done and out, and the school was just never her thing. Um, but she was extremely intuitive.
Yeah.
always knew far more, which, growing up sucked.
Yeah.
That was I mean, I was a good kid. I was a good kid, and, that's gonna be some questions that I have because 'cause we're gonna move off of politics here in a
Yeah.
second,
Yeah.
but she just knew things, and so for me at this point, I'd been involved in politics for, you know, b 5, 6, 7 years. I'd been around the state house a lot, I've been doing things, and so to watch her come up with that on her own,
Yeah.
will always stick with me because I
Yep.
thought, "That's what America thinks."
Yeah. That's it.
And because I really saw my mom, she would go to church on Sundays,
Yeah.
and she would go to church with Sundays, with people that, she didn't care for, and
Yeah.
then she would come home and she would cook a good meal, and she'd look out for, her household and her family, and that to me is America.
Yeah. That is.
And
That's it.
and to do that, and for her to just now, maybe perhaps she had her big toe in the waters of, "I've met this guy a few times." A vast majority of people will never meet the people that we've
Right.
met.
Right.
But for her to verbalize that before, I was like, "Well, it's
Yep.
in."
Yep.
It's
That's it.
in, and I know even in our friend group, if you remember, I still have, um, a signed thing from Marco Rubio,
Yeah. Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
but if you remember, I was pretty pro-Trump from the beginning.
You were. You were.
And, more so than the rest of the group, and
Yes.
if folks have seen how that's ebbed and flowed over the years, that would be well, certainly a news cycle. But I was because there was something about the way my mom was like, This is what we need right now."
Yep.
And, um, I saw it as, she, to me, was the litmus test of Middle America.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why I was just so pro-Trump from the beginning. And
Right.
you and I joke a lot that, "Hey, Bob likes any candidate that's willing to just burn it down,"
Yeah.
because I'm fine with that in many areas. Um, but,
Yeah.
so that's how that happened. I wanna wrap up the politics real
Sure.
quick because at this point, my guess is the only people still gonna be listening to this is on day 7. Crabtree's gonna be still listening to it and sending us text. I don't know if you have Chris, as you're watching this 2 weeks from now, I don't know, Mike, if you're watching, I have on my screen it pulled up, and the boys are mocking your birthday on the text
Are they
thread.
really? Oh yeah,
Yeah,
look.
they are.
Look
They
at
are.
that.
They are.
Look at
So,
that.
anyways,
Jerks.
happy birthday, Mike Neal.
Oh, thanks.
So all of this happens, um, Pence leaves, and when you're in politics, things just that is constantly ebbing and flowing. Things are constantly changing. Um, one of the great work joys of my life was getting to work with you
Yeah.
at the Pipeline Safety Division at the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. And we were coworkers. You were my boss for a while, and though it didn't change the relationship because again, exactly what you told Chris Crabtree.
Yeah.
What you see is what you get. There's
That's right.
no changing
That's
him.
right. Nope.
If you ask him to do something, he'll do it.
Right.
He may piss and moan about it, but he'll do it. It'll be done. It'll be done right. You don't have to think about
Yeah.
it.
That's right.
And um, I don't know because we never know what our life paths are going to be on. Um, so that's my day job. For those
Yep.
listening, I'm a pipeline engineer with the uh, utility commission. My day job has been in utilities for 20 some odd years,
Yeah.
digging ditch, putting pipe in the ground. Um, but I don't know that my joy comes from other things, not work. I've never really been one to say like, "Hey, this is my job title, so now this is my identity." I do that job because I like to do this. I like
Right.
to go on vacations. I like to do these things, and
Right.
um, but I don't know that I've ever had more consistent joy than working with a friend like yourself on just a day to day.
Yeah.
Um, that was a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
um, I remember when we were. we were talking initially because, um, we share the memes all the time, and sometimes you may even be mad that I'm about to say this right now, but we've
Does it
always
matter?
had no, it doesn't matter because it's my show. We have always joked that, you know, what's the first thing Mike, what's the first thing you do when someone says, "Hey, Mike, don't say anything?"
I call you.
And I do the same. And the amount of things that we could loosely consider classified, you and we're gonna
Yep.
claim hetero life partner spousal privilege on this, and that's a term that we're gonna have hold up in the Supreme Court.
Oh, geez.
Um, but that idea that, we're bouncing around, and I was so sad to see you go.
Yeah.
I remember um, very consciously when we were talking about, hey, I've got some other opportunities there. I remember taking a pause and saying, okay, when you give advice, give good advice,
Yeah.
give neutral advice. Don't give bias advice. Don't
Right.
give the advice of, I don't want my friend to leave.
Right.
We have a good thing here. I don't want that. And so I don't have anything to say from that other than I've always appreciated it, and that was my favorite time. I still like working for the state. I'm hoping
Yeah.
for another 25 years,
Yeah.
um, because it's doing what
Yeah.
I I like doing. It's not a passion. I'd say if we had a Teams meeting right now with all the commissioners, it's not my passion, but I happen to be good at it, and
Right. Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
it's just not my I there's some folks who love going to bed reading code.
Yeah.
That's not me.
No.
Um, but so really that's more of a statement of just
Yeah.
it has not been the same, and I've made peace with that because I don't think it was meant to be. How could you possibly enjoy working with your best friend but
Yeah.
have that go on forever?
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
needed to be what it was,
Well,
and
that was the name of the last Star Trek: The Next Generation episode was
all
all
good
good
things.
things.
Yeah, yeah, and
All
and
good
and and
things.
I think it for it to be a good thing, it must end,
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
and,
Sooner than I think either of us probably hoped, but
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and the you've you've had a couple times in the last couple years we've called and, it's, we're trying to figure out, "Hey, what do we wanna do?" And,
Yeah.
say we, you, and, I, uh, I am so, so happy that, um and you can cut this part out and then show it to her later. I am so happy you have someone like Kristen
Yeah.
who, um, is so much better for you than our group.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think we have the best
We do.
possible group of friends,
We do.
and, um, I even don't mind when we argue
Yeah.
because it's iron sharpens iron,
Right.
and so whether I'm you know he's watching it, so I don't really care. So whether I'm sideways with Crabtree on something or Warner's just doing
Yeah.
one of his old whatever, and Ben disappearing for 3 weeks on the text thread and
Yeah.
then coming back and
Right.
blowing it up for 2 hours at 10 o'clock at night, we're the best. But I have to say, Mike, I think your biggest success. We've talked about, how you were instrumental in turning around Lake County, how you were instrumental in, getting Pence into the state house, and how you that work then got him to be vice president. All those things here. Your biggest success was the fact that you somehow convinced Kristen that despite her vision problems and low self-esteem, you somehow were the one
This is at
for
hour 33. I have to make sure I know where to mark
yes,
this
hour
when I go back and look for it.
33:41 that, hey honey, this and to watch you be a dad
Yeah.
is a lot of fun. And I know it changed me and my outlook on,
Yeah.
and I think that was my biggest change of my outlook at the utility commission was I'm a dad now. I have to be everything for him. But since you can't pour from an empty cup,
Right.
I need something that fulfills me.
Yeah.
And to see you doing that in ways too,
No.
it's really I can't give you enough credit. And I don't know why this sounds like I'm blowing smoke up your ass right
Yeah.
now, but it's as a friend, I just have to say I could not be more proud of that path in your life.
I
That
appreciate it.
whatever else happens,
Yeah.
I mean, it's small potatoes. Now
Yeah.
at the time, oh, it's time it feels like you're riding,
Yeah.
the rapids and it's rough, but
Yeah.
uh, you know, um,
Well, it's
you
funny.
know,
It's funny you mentioned that, I appreciate all of that. And that Kristen is my rock, and Brooks my son, and the future family that will continue to grow. But my uncle Kevin, who's since passed several years ago, he was going through a rough patch in his life where it just seemed like the career and everything everything was just kind of tumultuous, and probably wasn't going to be where he was at too much longer, and these kind of things. And I remember I was really young, but I remember him saying this when he was just kind of talking. I think he may have been talking to my dad about the woes of what was going on. And he says, "But you know what? The one thing, all the things, like they can take away my money, they can take away my job, they can take away my company car, bank can take my house, they can do any of these things. But you know what they can't take away from me? They can't take away my family from me."
yeah,
And that was his core and his rock. And no matter what, that unit was always going to be there. That unit was always going to be there for him. And that's how I feel in where I'm at today. And we will have to get into that because someone may listen and be really mad at saying what I want to say. And at some point I will say it, just not today.
yeah.
But that really is for me. It's taken me a while, and I know that something better is going to be on the other side, and I'm excited for the next phase. But you're
Well,
absolutely right.
and it is, and I think so I had varying degrees of luck with just a career, and I think that's because I was never happy.
Sure.
But then when Liam came around, it was I need to do something that he can be proud of,
Yeah.
and while he may not, you know, pipeline safety. That wasn't what I meant by that. Is
Yeah.
I need to live in a way to put something back into the world that he can be proud of. And so
Yeah.
then I I,
Yeah.
I, I got elected, and now
Right.
I'm finding a way to be personable and putting my story out there
Yeah.
in various ways, whether it's here or on radio or just out in the community,
Right.
and um and so that was just such a major change and completely refocused everything.
Yeah.
And I see that in you in that um, it's we all still have personal ambitions.
Yeah.
I'd love for this thing to get 1,000,000 views. That'd be
That's right.
cool. Why?
Yeah.
Just because that sounds cool. But
Yeah.
I don't. I now do things that may for him in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, no, that's all I got with that.
Yeah.
I do want to shift away from politics
All right.
because
Let's
I
do it.
think at an hour 30 something.
I mean, we could be here
Um,
for another 3 hours talking about
oh, we could.
that part
Oh
alone.
my oh my gosh. Oh, I there is so much. Oh, one day.
We'll have to do a part two someday or something, or
We'll
do
have
it on my show or something.
let's do a part 2, but
Yeah.
I swear it's got to be like 15 years down the
Yep.
road
Uh huh. Yep.
because the amount of we've always said, so for those listening, we've got a text thread that has been going on for over 10 years, over 10 years, and I'm going to call them out now. It is myself, Mike Neal, Ben Evans, who's been on this show, Mark Warner, and Chris Crabtree.
Yep.
And we have had an ongoing conversation for over 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've often joked that if one of us loses our phones, it there have been times, and I'm being totally serious. We're joking here, and I'm being totally serious. And now we're going to have some Russian spy come steal our phone, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah.
But there have been times where if one of our phones got out, I no joke, it would have made news.
Do you remember when Crabtree lost his phone at the Library of Congress?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
You and I were in full emergency mode.
Oh, yes. Hey, Chris Crabtree, you're listening in your car on Apple Podcasts when you're not
I
listening to CNN. Yeah, we remember when you lost your phone at the Library of Congress.
And I wasn't worried about Chris losing personal property. I was worried about what was going to happen to me when someone found his personal
Yeah.
property.
And the best part of Chris Crabtree is his wife,
Yes,
Alicia, and
Alicia.
even
Oh my
she was
gosh.
concerned that
Yeah.
he lost his phone at the library. Dude,
Remember that?
dude,
That was amazing. What an amazing night that
you
was.
know what's on this stuff.
Uh-huh.
You can't be losing
Yep.
it.
Yep.
And
That's
so I
awesome.
guess that's the only teaser that now some people think, man, what do they talk
What
about?
are they
What do
talking
they
about? Yeah.
trust me, folks. We know a lot of people. We're
Yeah.
involved with a lot of people,
Yep.
and we share a lot of things.
That's right.
And
Yep.
there have been times where certainly we would have all been fired,
Oh.
but there was
Mhm.
times when various elected officials would have, I'm sure, had to at least be given a quote
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
CNN or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
all right, forget all that.
All right. It's over.
If I don't have one, you mentioned an early picture of you with hair and pence. I have a picture of you with hair, but if you were to take a a picture of yourself, from high school. I didn't have the pleasure of knowing you.
Yeah.
Um, we didn't grow up in the same community,
Mm-mm.
and so I don't know the Mike Neal that grew up into the person that met at what we think is Baker Square. All that is prior. But you have this picture, and you're looking at um this picture of 15-year-old Mike Neal, 18-year-old Mike Neal. The two questions is, where you are now, was it on any map that you had? And the second question is, what would you say to that guy who is Mike Neal, 15, 18 years old?
Yeah, yeah. No, I would not would say anything that I am experiencing today as was something that was on my radar. I think there were some general parallel lines to things. Like I always seemed to be interested in politics and governance, just more of a not at a passionate level, but more of just a general awareness. And I was on student council and those kind of things, and so there was parallels there. But I would never. We would look entirely different from what if I had to take a picture and then draw what I thought I would be 20 years
Yeah.
from that point. It would have been incredibly different. But what I would say to him, you can probably say this to anyone at that age, with that, being hindsight, is that I think there was I don't regret anything I might regret one thing, and again, we're not going to talk about that today.
Yeah.
But I don't live with any regrets. But I'm someone who my mind is analytical, and I think it's what made me really good at advance. Was I will look at a thousand different ways something can occur, and
Yeah.
beat it to death in my head to choose the right one. Now I can do it very quickly, but also sometimes after you've done something, you kind of path it back in your head. And there was just been some things I think I didn't go to college right away. And now that if I hadn't, I wouldn't have gone to go to the utility commission. So I know that my steps were ordered properly.
Right.
But the end goal of what I wanted to do today is like, well, you should have just paid attention and went to school, right? Instead of going out on the pipeline and working for a couple of years and those kind of things. But I would go back and say, just be more intentional, but intentionality as a kid, there's a lot of people who say no. There's people in the office that I am about to leave would say, no, your college years, they're not for being a college Republican. They're not these things. They're not whatever. I tell you what, a lot of people were very successful because they found a passion at an early age and they stuck with it for a long time, because some of these things are time honored. Building relationships are time honored. Getting good at anything is practice makes perfect. That doesn't mean that you can't be a stupid drunk in college and make your way through and then still be something. Of course you can.
Yeah.
But for me, I have always had a hard time, and this is why I hated school. I got a master's degree. I can see 3 degrees on the wall. I'll never go back again. I'm done with stupid school. I knew I needed those to get where I wanted to go over time. But I hate doing things that have no effect. I cannot get
Praise
motivated.
baby Jesus.
Well,
I I
I
was
can't.
awful in school. I was
I
awful in
can't.
school for the same reason that, um, I I cringe at even some work stuff, which even when you were a
Yeah.
supervisor might have been to the chagrin of yourself because busy work. I don't
Right.
if you tell
Oh.
me 2 plus 2 is
Yep.
4, I know 2 plus I don't need to
Yep.
write it
Right.
1,000 times.
Yep.
And I was always a BC student because what
Yep.
would happen is I wouldn't do the homework, but I would
Yep.
get an A or B on the
Yep.
test
I
because
mean,
I didn't like
yeah.
busy work, and I hated school,
Yeah.
hated it.
I hate it because I can't write a paper that I get a grade and then it's over and you don't do anything else with it. But
Yeah.
when I was state Young Republican chairman, I wrote this huge 5-year plan that set the trajectory of an organization looking 5 years ahead, fundraising, and I got motivated because I knew it was something, one, I got to lead, and two, it was going to have some sort of effect. And then
Yeah.
writing all the advanced documents that we did, and writing a bunch of policy. And you guys right now are living two administrative rules in the utility commission that I wrote or had a
Yeah.
part of writing. I think they call them
Thanks a lot.
yeah, you're welcome. Well, the operators hate it more than you do,
Yeah.
but but there was, like, I was so jazzed by sitting there and writing essentially my own version of code because there was going to be a safety aspect that was going to make people's lives safer when working with natural gas, which is very hazardous, to policies written, in the office that I work in today. And it's like those sound really nerdy, right? Oh yeah, this idiot's writing policy, huh?
I totally get it. I was for shit at school,
Yeah.
but I have to say if I'm gonna pat myself on the back, I am an amazing town council person
Yes.
because I will get in there and I will work out resolutions and ordinances
Yes.
and
Yep.
set paths and
Yep.
trajectories that are going to far outlive me in the town
Right.
of Dyer.
Yeah.
And I can put 40 hours in a 72-hour time span
Right.
on that,
Yeah.
and it feel like nothing,
Yeah.
and come out and not be tired and just excited, ready to go.
Yeah.
But you tell me to, um, you know, hey Bob, can we get a 3-page essay on Ernest Hemingway? And it's like, oh, because we want to know that you know how to research things. You know, I
Ridiculous.
I I,
And it's
I
how the
couldn't
world
do it.
works. I mean,
Yeah,
that's why I put these on the wall,
yeah.
knowing that
You
I
you
needed
you
I
you
needed the
need them.
credential to get in. But yeah.
You need them just to walk in.
Yep.
I am going to wrap this up here. An hour
All right.
46. This is the longest podcast. Um, I do say one of the nice things in the Make Mike Feel Good podcast hour that we're doing is something you said very recently gave me such reassurance on this podcast. And like most good things that friends say, you might not have even realized that it was something that triggered. We were talking about the differences between our 2 podcasts,
Yeah.
that yours may be to 20, 30 minutes about different topics. Mine, can go on for an hour and 20, hour and a half. This is gonna top 2 hours before we're done.
Yeah.
And I said, "I don't know if I should do that." And I don't even know if I finished my phrase. You said, "No, don't." Just the encouragement of do your thing.
Yeah.
Just do your thing. If
Yeah.
this is what you like, do it. And I like it to a point where I don't I'm interested in people watching and giving me feedback, but it's
Yeah.
not why I do it. I do it because I got to spend 2 hours with my friend tonight just,
Yeah.
you know, shooting it.
Just talking.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this here, I'm gonna ask you these 10 questions. I know
It's
you don't wanna answer
all
them,
right. I'm
but
gonna answer them.
again,
I know one
I
of them
don't
because I read
care.
it.
It's my show. The
Remember when I told
Bernard.
you when I remember to told t- when I told you to do what you want? You should forget that.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
The karaoke hour.
What idiot said that?
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
right? Um, oh, we should have a part 3 of just idiots we've met.
And 4 and 5.
5,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That's
yeah,
going to be a
yeah.
series. Yeah.
YouTube kicked out the video for being too long. All right, the Bernard Provaux questionnaire. I asked these of all of my guests.
All right.
Um, I initially the they're the original questions that James Lipton would ask on the Inside the Actor Studio.
Yeah.
He got them from the Bernard Provaux questionnaire. He changed them a little bit, but I always loved that part of it because I felt like it was almost like the word association. I say sky, you say blue, I say water, you say
Yeah.
wet. And I always felt like I learned more from whoever he was interviewing in that, like, 5 or 10 minutes than I did for the 2 hours beforehand where they're talking about, "Oh, I was on set and I did this and that." Where when they ask these questions, it's like, "Well, this is who that person is, not
Yeah,
who the actor is, not who the politician is
right.
or anybody. This is just, who it is." So the first question is, what is your favorite word?
I have 2 because one really means something, and one is just the tight rope we walk every day. My favorite word is I think I've said it once or twice on the show tonight is intentionality, because
Mhm.
I try to live a life of intentionality. I know it's perfect, and sometimes that turns into a foobar, which obviously stands for something effed up
Yeah.
beyond all recognition, you know,
Yeah.
which is what I'm living right now. But so
Oh,
of not,
yeah.
and I didn't even do it. I'm not even the one that effed it up, But no, beyond that
Dear
part,
diary,
yeah, yeah,
foobar, day
yeah,
number
foobar.
73.
Foobar. But intentionality, because it's a guiding principle. It's not always perfect. It means a lot to me to be, in order to be a father, in order to, be a husband, in order to, do the work I want to do. I've had to be intentional about certain things in my life. Going to school, hated it, absolutely hated it. But it was an intentional act of something I needed to do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What is your least favorite word?
um,
Can I answer for you?
go ahead.
Now, my guess is no. You hate being told no.
I don't like being told no. I don't like being corrected, because usually I'm still right. but
Yeah.
but I also hate the word moist.
Someone else had said that, and it's such a weird
If Hannah Bond is listening, she hates
Hannah Bond.
moist spreaders.
Yeah, yeah.
That's you're gonna have to
Oh,
bleep that one on YouTube,
oh,
because they're
nope,
gonna think we're
nope,
talking about something stupid.
nope,
Yeah.
nope. We're talking something to Actually, I'm going to reclip that to just say Hannah Brown.
Moist
Boy.
spreaders.
Oh,
Congratulations, Hannah Bond, by the way, for the new job that you got. She's chief of staff at the racing team, for the company that she works for, which is really neat, for
that's
the Indy
exciting.
500. So good for her.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
The only question that I've changed on here, because I had to, because I didn't think people would quite understand it,
Yeah.
is the original question is, what is your favorite drug? Now, the Bernard Pivot questions was in like the 60s and 70s.
Sure.
And so some of that did have some illicit
Yeah.
connotation to it. Where I did change it to, what is your favorite feel good drug? Now, I use drug as um maybe a catch-all.
Sure.
There are times, depending on my mood, my favorite drug is the therapy of going to get a tattoo. I
Yeah.
mean, because a drug is
Sure.
something that, in my thought process, you do that then makes you feel good
Yeah.
for whatever reason. And we're gonna laugh. Sometimes it's food. So,
Oh,
sometimes
I was
it's
just gonna
food.
say Mexican food. You took my thunder away.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, uh,
Um,
for me, outside of being fat and eating Mexican food, which makes you feel, it's more of a feelings eating thing.
yeah.
To me, it's just get in the car and take a long drive.
Okay.
For a thought of things. Sometimes that's, you need to clear your head.
Yes.
Sometimes it's like, man, I'm super excited. I need to just kind of, just want to go, and I want to drive, and I want to think about things, and I want to maybe listen to some music, and then maybe this podcast, or
Yeah.
maybe nothing, or the window down.
That's a long ass drive,
Yeah,
dude.
yeah, I'm gonna drive to your house and back,
Yeah.
and listen to
Yeah.
this. And so it's not always because I need to clear my head, but sometimes just a good long
There
drive
there
of
is
no place to
something,
go.
um,
You know.
occasionally I don't, and when she watches this, Becca, at some point, um, I do agree, and it's something that I think in the 20 years we've been together, we've never actually had this conversation. And sometimes I think, man, I wish she knew. Well, if she would know if you told her. There really is something cathartic about getting in a car and then just driving for an
Yeah.
hour. You're listening to music,
Yep.
but how do you do that when you got a wife and
Yep.
kid at
Yeah.
home and there's
I
laundry to be done
I do it.
and dishes to be
Yeah.
done? that's like, "Hey, babe, I gotta go clear my head." She's like, "Well, we all do. Here's
Yeah.
the laundry."
Yep. I do it less. I do it less now for sure.
Yeah,
I do
but
it less now. Plus, I have a long commute, so I guess that kind of helps. But,
yeah. What is your if and I realize this is it goes against your faith in
oh
a
boy.
sense, but if you were to be reincarnated into anything else, what would it be?
Man, that's a good one. Um, honestly, I mean, I think I'd get reincarnated into like some sort of like large bird or eagle. Uh, do you want to know why? Or you just want to move on?
This
Yeah.
has been episode 112 with my friend the albatross.
I was gonna go bald eagle because but whatever. The albatross, Mike the albatross.
That's
I,
funny.
I mean, I have always been, and maybe it's just the way I function in my head. I've a bird can go from being very high up and in out of the way to very into the thick of it. They can see at 30,000 feet, and they can get more granular. They can, and I'm a person who lives in details, but I still like the good view of a 30,000 foot view
Mhm.
in details. I like, and then from even a more practical perspective, I love flying places too. But from that perspective, it's like an eagle. Is really in all of it from the big picture to the small picture, and they can at any point move back and forth. They can go hunt, and then they can go nest, and they can fly, and they can whatever it is,
Yeah.
you know. And so yeah, I mean, that's the best answer I can come up with. Mike the
That's a good
albatross.
answer.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. Mike the albatross. It's the new replacement for Sesame Street since the government canned PBS. Now
Oh,
kids are subjected to Mike the albatross. I now fully support a fully funded
all
PBS.
right, all right,
That's I'm
all right.
spending
Call
it.
your local congressman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What noise or sound do you hate?
Uh, uh, somebody scratching their jeans with their fingernails.
Oh,
Hate
okay.
that sound.
What
Hate that sound.
noise or sound do you love?
Uh, my son running through the house, laughing and yelling at full voice
Yeah.
is my favorite. Or coming home. Now he's to this point where he's old enough now where he's excited when somebody comes home. And if I'm pulling up in the driveway and he's standing at the window, and I get out of the car and you get close enough to the window and you can just hear him shouting, "Daddy!" I mean, you can see
Yeah.
his mouth is open wide,
That's the
and
best.
it's the best.
Yeah.
It's the best.
What is your favorite curse word?
Oh shit. No, yeah, that's probably it. That's probably the one I use the most if I have to use one.
I so I say everything. We've much to the chagrin of Becca and probably Liam's teachers and everyone is I've always said there's no such thing as a bad word, Liam. There's only adult words. And
Sure.
some of these words
Yeah.
because I don't um sometimes I get a little maybe yuppie with parenting.
Yeah.
There are no all words are valid words in the right context.
Yeah.
I've said this before. Um, the first time I heard Liam swear, um, he was I walked past his room and he was putting Legos together. I've said this a million times, and he couldn't get them apart, and he goes, "Damn it!" Now tell me with all the right and might of God, how was that wrong?
Yeah.
I have put
Yeah.
Legos together and
Yeah.
I can't damn it.
Yeah.
I was like,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's now
Yeah.
we say, "Hey buddy," that's an adult word.
Right.
And now since then he says other things that
Mm.
oh, that's a
Mm.
good story. Oh, we got to get to that
Oh
in a second.
gosh. All right.
Um but
I think I said more than that.
I
Yeah.
think yeah. Yeah, no. Oh shit's a good one. Yeah.
Oh
For
shit.
those of you listening,
Yeah.
I have a Mike Neal story here
That's
for
one
you.
of the best stories.
So I am Mike and we talk all the time. I mean, I think it's near daily.
Yeah.
At least 2 or 3 times a week that we talk on the phone, but,
Yeah.
certainly text daily. Um, so I'm in my car. Mike's hooked up to Bluetooth because, Indiana, hands-free driving, never touch a phone, drive safe, arrive safe, hashtag whatever. I don't know. So Mike's on the phone. We're talking, and something had irritated Mike. I don't know what it was, but he was excitable. And let me tell you, he used every one of the favorite curse words. Unbeknownst to him, I was driving behind Becca. Becca had Liam in the car, and I was driving a little too close. Close enough, mind you, that the Bluetooth technological signal had bounced from my car into her car. And so now Mike Neal was I saying the best lines of every Quentin Tarantino movie to my wife and son, who had no ability to stop the phone call, mute the phone call, do anything with the phone call because for some reason it had inserted itself into her radio device. And I see her flailing her arms, and I'm wondering, where did Mike go?
Yeah.
I was just about to hear a good story.
And Mike doesn't know anything
And
at
Mike
this
doesn't know
moment.
anything because if you've ever talked with Mike on a phone, Mike gets pretty myopic and he
Yeah.
thinks that his conversation's the only one going on. So he
Yeah.
didn't know that we'd been disconnected. And so, yes, my son learned many a new word.
That's not why he said what he said at the Lego, though.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true. 3 more questions. And
Okay.
then, we just hit the 2-hour mark.
There it is.
Just
We're going to a
running by
land
speed.
speed record, folks, ladies and
Yeah,
gentlemen.
yeah. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh, jeez. I mean, part of me because of what I want to do is I don't know that I want to, but I hate school so much I never would have done it. I think I'd have made a pretty good lawyer.
Yeah.
I think I always did really good in debate and speech in high school.
Yeah.
Again, I'm doing a podcast, Mike on the right, streaming everywhere, and I feel like I talk, fairly well. I could form an argument and talk in front of people, and but that then takes, again, you got to get the piece of paper, right? So
Yeah.
which is really stupid because I can, yeah, that's it.
Question number 9. Which profession other than your own would you not like to attempt?
Anything medical, and thank God for my wife who is a physician assistant. I don't like pass out at the sight of blood or anything like that. I just can't imagine. Like, my wife does hip and knee replacement surgeries, so the first thing they have to do is cut somebody open.
Yeah.
And other than cutting a
And then
steak,
have you ever seen that? They take the thing and they go ding, 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 ding.
I watched the video. True story. I watched the video. My wife had to do. She does hip and knee replacements, but at one point she had to do. I think it was like a shoulder. And I come home, and it was just our previous house in Noblesville. And I walk in, and on the TV, or maybe this year, on this we have a big 70-inch TV in our living room. And she's in there watching a YouTube video trying to remind herself of some of the things to do with the shoulder, which she'd been trained to do. It was just kind of like, let's just be reminded. She's the physician assistant, right? So she's doing what the doctor is telling her. So she's not doing anything. But I'm like, well, you know what? This is like operating theater, and she's 1 hour into some 3-hour video she's got to watch. And so I just sat there and watched it too.
Yeah.
And I asked a lot of questions, a lot of things. It's like, yeah, I think once I was inside, I think probably be okay, but man, cutting the skin just didn't seem like anything I want to do.
No. Last question. You're going to give me the church answer. I already know it.
Okay, so are you saying I just can't give you the church answer then?
No, you can give the church answer. You can give the church answer if you want. I just know you're going to give me that, which is fine because I suppose it's the legitimate answer. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well, the Bible obviously says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." But if I had to hear the thing, it's like, thank you for treating other people who I created the way that you did. I've always had. Now I get mad at things and people, and as I get older, there's less people that I like. But one thing that
Amen.
I seriously, I'm a huge extrovert, and I do not care to have as many friends as I used to anywhere. I have a close knit of people. We talk about this at the beginning of the show
Yeah.
in politics alone, but even just in like my friendships, like no, I just have this group of people, and nothing against y'all, but peace. But one thing I do want to espouse and live though is there's people who can do things for me, and there are a ton of people who can't do anything for me. And from the waitress to the janitor to anything, right? I want to be remembered for someone who was just genuinely kind to people, regardless of what our relationship was. If I see them one time, say 3 words, and never see them again, or I know them for 30 years, and yeah, we had arguments and things like that, but I would have been known for being someone who was kind to others, even
Yeah.
though we're in a profession that can sometimes be portrayed as unkind. And that's because the decisions that are upon our shoulder. Maybe this is a way to end the show. The decisions that are on our shoulders, or others that are above us or even below us. When you're making decisions for the public good and knowing that the decision you make affects a lot of people is very weighty. And sometimes that's making sure that center point energy is doing things the right way so things don't get blown up. All the way to the governor is deploying the National Guard in emergency to save lives.
Yeah.
Anything in between, it affects other people, and I that's a responsibility. I don't get a cool title. I'm not special assistant. I'm not director this or town council member that. I'm a steward of a public trust for the time that I'm in this position and I'm in office, and it's a responsibility that I have. It's not just a cool title. Yeah, I get to do cool things,
Yeah.
but it's a responsibility. So there. See, that wasn't quite the church answer you thought.
No, no, that was pretty good. I know that was all a lie, but no.
Well, I didn't say I was going to treat you that way, but
Yeah, I
yeah, for
know,
everybody
right?
else.
Um, so I will wrap it up here just by saying, uh, to pull on this is even maybe even gonna sound a little negative. It is surprising the older I get, the fewer people that, um, I want to give my true time to.
Yeah,
I'm an elected official. I mean, I give them my time doing a podcast on the radio in front of all 16,000 constituents.
right.
My job, all these things that are requirements. Now you could say, you don't need to do a podcast, but they're part of things. But the true time, the time when um that continues to shrink, and it really tends to be family, our group that
Yeah,
I may have. It'd be interesting. I should have done if had I known this would go this. I would have counted. I bet you I have spoke with 20 people today,
yeah,
and it intentionally through text messages and phone calls. I bet you it's been 20 people, and really that's a lot of people for
yeah,
one person to engage in business with at all times. So yes,
yeah,
while I'm engaging with these people, you know, yeah, that circle shrinks, and so
yeah,
um, to want to say, hey, I want our interactions to be good,
yeah.
but you know, also if they aren't, um, it's not out of malice.
Right. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
sometimes the answer is no.
yeah.
We're not always Santa Claus,
Right,
and for every yes, there's a no, and sometimes you are on the no side of things,
right.
and in every different way of life. And the only good thing about having a no is knowing that uh, the other side is a yes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
wow, that was surprisingly deep for
That was wow.
yeah.
Yeah, we ended the show on that note.
We did. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening for just over 2 hours to my friend Mike Neal. I don't even know what the description of this podcast is going to be. I really don't.
Ask Chat GPT. Let it
Yeah,
analyze it and see
just
what it
hey,
comes up with.
analyze it, say it, post it, put it up there. But Mike, I thank you for taking a couple hours of your day on your birthday.
Great way to
Uh,
end my day.
happy birthday,
Thank you, sir.
and I'm assuming everyone's sleeping. Um,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Even the cat's not out here.
Yeah.
Mm. That's
So,
how late it is here.
yeah. All right, Mike, thanks for everything. I
Yes, sir.
appreciate your friendship, your guidance, and taking a couple hours out of your night. So, I'm going to kick us out of here, and I will see everybody next time.